All right, I'll go ahead and dive in. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia with Politics in Prose. We're live with author Roya Hakakian and Michelle Hackman discussing A Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious. We've put a link in the chat column if you want to get the book directly from us at Politics in Prose. If you have a question this hour, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We'll move to questions in the last portion of the discussion, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time. Additionally, we're glad to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. To enable captions, click the CC live transcript icon at the bottom of your screen. And we do want to thank all of you out there for joining us this evening. We are so grateful to our loyal family of customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. And now to this great book, written as a guide for the newly arrived and providing practical information and advice. Roya Hakakian, an immigrant herself, reveals what those who settle here love about the country, what they miss about their homes, the cruelty of some Americans, and the unceasing generosity of others. She captures the texture of life in a new place in all its complexity, laying bare both its beauty and its darkness as she discusses race, sex, love, death, consumerism, and what it is like to be from a country that is in America's crosshairs. Roya Hakakian is also the author of Assassins of the Turquoise Palace and Journey from the Land of No, and has published 2 collections of poetry in Persian. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and on NPR's All Things Considered. She has collaborated on programming for leading journalism units in network television, including 60 Minutes, and is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and on the editorial board of World Affairs. Since 2015, she has taught at Thread, a writing workshop at Yale, and is a fellow at the Davenport College at Yale. And moderating this evening is Michelle Hackman, a reporter in the Wall Street Journal's Washington Bureau, where she covers immigration policy and the Department of Homeland Security. Previously, she wrote about health and education policy. Michelle first joined the journal in 2016 and is a graduate of Yale University. On behalf of Politics in Prose, please join me in welcoming Roya Hakakian and Michelle Hackman. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to say this is a real dream come true for me because I met Roya maybe 10 years ago when I was an undergrad at Yale. And I don't think I could have imagined then that we would be sharing. It would have been nice to say sharing a stage together, but I guess sharing a Zoom screen is what we do now.
Sounds close.
So yeah, for those of you who have read Roya's book, it's called A Guide. I'm curious, I want to start by talking about the structure that this book takes. It is structured as a guide. It's written in the second person, but as Roya and I discussed the other day, it's almost an anti-guide. It's filled with advice, but some of it's sort of cheeky advice and observations about America that only, an immigrant who has been here a long time could make. So Roya, can we start with sort of you telling us why you decided to write this book in the way that you did?
Sure. Hi, Michelle, and hi, everyone. I think I was entirely surprised in 2016. I certainly surprised myself when I realized that everything I was hearing about how the immigrants should not enter this country anymore, or how the country was full and we couldn't allow any new refugees in, or that we should allow only the ones who spoke English or had wealth or had skills. And every time I heard one of those statements, even though I've long been naturalized and I've been in this country for decades, for over 30 years, each time I heard one of those statements, I took it incredibly personally. In one case, after the ban on people from Muslim nations, including Iran, which is where I come from and which is where your parents were born and raised, I entirely literally panicked, which was completely irrational. I mean, I'm an American citizen, I'm safe here. But I realized that whether I liked it or not, the issue for some reason was viscerally very, very close and alive and real for me. And then I decided that in response to all that, I needed to speak up. I needed to stick up for my kind, for the immigrants and for the refugees, for people who were under the ban. I needed to offer some sort of an explanation, if not a defense, for who we are and why we come and what we see and how we feel and all those things. And you asked about why the book is in second person.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the main reason was that I didn't want it to sound like a piece of reportage. I didn't want it to feel distant to the readers. I didn't want it to sound like anything else anybody was reading. So I didn't want it to be in third person. I didn't want it to be in the first person voice because I didn't want any reader to pick up the book and say, well, we can dismiss this one because it's just one person's account. So I was looking for a way of appealing to readers. I was looking for a way of getting past the anger, getting past the divisions, and making the immigrant become a very accessible and knowable person. And I thought in order to do that, I have to not sound like anything else that was out there. And therefore I chose the second person.
When we were talking, I said, the way I've tried to describe this book is that it is a guide for the newly arriving immigrant, but really the refugee, someone who has been sort of torn away from their own country, pushed out in some way, had to run. But it feels like even more than that, it's a book written for people like me who haven't actually gone through that experience, but are curious to know what it feels like. I mean, was that one of your aims?
Well, sure. I mean, initially, I just wanted to, make a plea. I just wanted to, especially when I heard, some of the rhetoric that immigrants come here, or refugees, or Mexicans, or whatever. They come here to take our jobs, or rob us, or commit crimes, and I thought if anyone who had been uprooted could do anything, including myself when I first arrived in those early months, it would be to just put one foot in front of the other. So I thought, that's really my job. I am going to make people understand that what the experience is like for the majority of us. I'm going to bring people very close to the internal experience. But in the process, I realized that I'm also talking to people like you, first generation Americans. I've been very surprised at previous presentations where sons and daughters of immigrants from all parts of the world come and tell me that the things that they've read in the book remind them of the stuff that their parents have told them.
Totally.
But towards the end of the book, I discovered that I'm also writing the book, and perhaps even more so towards the end of the book, for non-immigrant Americans, for native-born Americans, for the curious, as it is in the title of the book. Because I thought there are things that must be reminded of. There are aspects of this country that possibly is obscure to them because these things have always been there. And so I realized towards the end that, it was for the immigrant that I started out the project with. But as I went through the process, it seemed that I realized that there were others whom I had in mind. And so my addressees changed.
I felt very seen by the book. I'm definitely, at one point you talk about ways that you realize that you've become an assimilated immigrant. And one of the signs was that your children, understand your native tongue, but they choose to speak to you in English anyway. And I'm definitely one of those guilty children that does just that with my parents. And I should say, everyone, this is a conversation formally between Roya and me, but I would love for you guys to jump in with any questions or thoughts that you have now. We'll do a sort of formal Q&A at the end, but I will take any feedback now that I can incorporate. Roya, for those of the audience who haven't read your previous work, can you tell us a little bit about your own experience coming here as a refugee? And, in the beginning of the book, you spend a lot of time highlighting some of the really particular and kind of funny peculiarities of America, how all the choices you have for breakfast cereal, or some of the weird terminology that we use, in celebrity magazines, where we have all these terms to describe people's relationships, or, a star being back on the market. How much of that's coming from your own experience? What do you remember?
Probably a lot. And it's, I think over the years, when I sat down to write this book, it was only then that I realized that from the moment I arrived until I sat down to write this book, I have been taking mental notes on the experience of arrival and the experience of resettling, and everything else that has come with that. I didn't know how much I was filing away in some recesses of my mind in a very methodical way, but clearly I had been, and of course, as I'm sure this is your experience too, we naturally interact and come across a lot of other fellow immigrants. And also, I have actively been reading, especially for the purposes of this book, numerous memoirs and first-person accounts of other immigrants. So what I did was, I tried to choose the most common experiences, kind of sift through and see, if we were to leave aside the things that make us unique or make our experiences unique, and only focus on the things that we have in common. What are the things that most surprise us or we share the most? And I think the frivolity of, you mentioned cereals, frivolity, or some of the the unbelievable number of choices you have with everything when you step into a supermarket. It definitely strikes all of us as immigrants when we first arrive. And in addition to that, I also had come from Iran, where women are under the veil, and we female singers couldn't sing in public. Their voices.
There wasn't the same range of TV or magazines available.
Right.
Yeah.
So, now, I was here and I was seeing, watching the magazine covers and thinking, my God, has my universe changed? And not just by virtue of geography, which I refer to in the book, but in every other possible way. It was also a matter of, I had changed centuries, not just countries and continents or languages. It was as if I'd been pushed in some time capsule to some other time period where a lot of the things that had been my problems before were no longer my problems, and I had to catch up with all the developments and social evolutions, and the magazine covers, believe it or not, were part of that.
Yeah. You, in the book, you do this really cool thing, Roya, where you write about how America's unique form of democracy and our personal freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom to things like privacy shape all aspects of our lives. And you start off this section where you say, to understand love in America, you have to understand that it's connected to democracy. Can you explain that idea?
Well, yeah, I think I started thinking about that when, around the time of the election, presidential elections, especially not the 2020 presidential election, but the one before, the 2016. And I realized that for some reason, when we talk about democracy in this country, the overwhelming majority of people are somehow thinking about the elections, or the election process, or the right to vote. And I realized that there are so many other ways, smaller ways, in which I experience the American democracy, which other people don't seem to be aware of or talk about. So it was as if democracy was reduced to this singular issue of the elections. And I thought, but wait, everything else that happens in the wonderful, smooth, fantastic way that it happens in America also has to do with that, democratic foundation. And I thought, how could I reveal that aspect of the American democracy to people who have never lived in an undemocratic system? Could I find a way of showing them that they have, that democracy isn't just about one man, one vote, but it's also about the way they fall in love, the way they don't feel rushed to make a decision, because men and women, boys and girls in this country can socialize together in public, and they don't have to worry about what their tribes or conservative families or the leadership or the authorities tell them about keeping the two genders separate so that they cannot interact with one another, or lots of other things. And therefore I was saying, I just was trying to show that everything that we enjoy, including the fact that we could date and date and date and not, make an immediate decision or break it up or move in or not move in. All these possibilities that we had and we have, they are functions in part of this culture of choice, democratic culture that we have set up. And I thought, if I could only show a few ways in which I have been stunned by that encounter, then maybe I can get people to see that democracy is far more than once every 4-year event.
Totally. This book, I feel like, maybe spoke to me especially because we, Roya and I are both, she is an immigrant from Iran, a Jewish immigrant. My family are Jewish immigrants from Iran, and my parents went through some of the same thing. They went on 2 dates in the span of a week, and next thing you know, they're engaged.
Really, I didn't know that. Is that
yeah?
Right
My
here?
mom's on this. She's totally embarrassed that I just brought this up. They went on one supervised date, one unsupervised date, and then my mom's parents said to her, "You need to make a decision. You're being very rude."
Yes,
So.
yes. So yes. I mean, isn't that incredible that from one generation to the next, here we are, at you, the person who's, isn't even probably worried about, getting married because she has more important things to do, that she's reporting on the state of, American immigration and the problems with Homeland Security on a daily basis. So, dating has to wait, possibly. So, and I see all of that as things that I think non-immigrant Americans need to be reminded of, because they are democracy and choice and everything that
It's a privilege we have.
Everything that we
Yeah.
have built in the past 300 years, however flawed and imperfect, is the result of some miracle. And no miracle has been perfect, not even in the Bible. But here we are, and so let us recognize its various aspects, so that we can guard it, and so that we can make it better.
I wanted to touch on a theme that you seem to really enjoy and brought up a few times in the book, which is sort of how language shapes some of our value systems. And you talk about this a little bit in Love, where you say, in a lot of other languages, we don't have, words to describe, first of all, a lot of the feelings we feel when we're in love, or, feeling lustful. A lot of other languages don't have the concept of privacy. And in English, on the reverse, we really emphasize I and you in a way that maybe other languages don't. Curious if you could talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. This is precisely one other way that I thought I could help people see how the way we are set up as a society has infiltrated the way we think and the way we write. And the most important way, when it comes to writing, that it has, this our social setup has affected us, is that we allow the individual, we allow the I to have a major presence. In fact, we want to hear from the first person. We want to hear very clearly, concisely, directly, as all writing instructors advise us, what that individual writer feels, thinks, observes, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I come from a culture that tells you the opposite. Not only tells you to do the opposite, but it also tells you that all the aesthetic values surrounding the culture of writing require that you not be direct, that you not really say what it is that you mean, but dress it up in some beautiful metaphor, in some indirect way to speak of speech, and all these other ways. And so one of the first things that really my most important hurdles through college was that I wasn't going to college because in the first year, especially when I was taking sciences, because those were easier to kind of do well in, since
when you're not a native English speaker.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So biology was a lot easier. Math was a lot easier. Physics was a lot easier. The things that I had trouble with were the humanities, and it wasn't that I was not grasping the concepts. It was just that when I was supposed to write my papers, my teachers would say, everything you're writing, they sound good, but they're vague, and we're not sure what it is that you're trying to say. So it took me a long time, and I think it takes all of us as immigrants, especially if we are women, if we've come from cultures, or we're members of religious or other minorities where we have always been sort of on the margins of society, one of our greatest hurdles isn't necessarily mastering the language, but mastering ourselves as a tangible and bright presence on the page. And I think that was perhaps one of the most important ways in which I emigrated, right? I had physically come to America, but when it came to writing, I had to learn how to go from ambiguity to clarity. I had to learn how to go from keeping myself invisible and discreet as a narrator or presence in my own prose to being a very direct and open voice. And I consider that my second layer of arriving in the United States, because it was no longer the physical arrival, but it was the intellectual, the emotional, the cultural
adjustment. Yeah.
That was much harder and far more gratifying.
Yeah. I want to, this is one of my favorite topics, and I want to ask you a little bit about, in the book you write that as an immigrant, quote, how has fewer circles than your security check process? I don't think most people here, unless you've had a direct encounter with the immigration system, I don't think people here fully realize, immigrants today of how many sort of hurdles and steps they have to go through, and frankly, sometimes sort of humiliations or indignities that they have to put themselves through to be able to immigrate to America. And you touch on that. I mean, can you speak to sort of what it was like for you and what that process is like now? Has it gotten, even more extreme?
Yes, exactly. It has gotten more extreme, and it was humiliating even, 30 years ago when I went through it.
What about it?
Well, I part of the reason why I really wanted to do this to tell the non-immigrant Americans what this process was like was because people were saying that immigrants were committing crimes and they were dangerous, and I'm like, what? Do you know what trials they put us through? Do you know how many hurdles, security hurdles, we have to pass just to get in? That this quote safest people who could ever enter this country are the very people who are immigrating because of the multi-layered security process and background check processes that we undergo. And so I remember I was 18 we were doing the background checks, and as a teenager, when it was easier, I felt offended.
Do you remember what any of the questions they asked you?
Well, of course, there are. One of the things that I didn't do with this book, but wanted to do, was to actually include, the applications that we have to fill out. The application for asylum, or application for green card, or application for citizenship, where all of which are, each of which is 15 plus pages and more, assuming that it's only one, because oftentimes it's several different applications that you have to fill out simultaneously. And it asks you all sorts of things, so much so that I remember sitting down to fill out the application with my mother when we were in Vienna applying for asylum, and just laughing our heads off, like, were you members of some militia group that fought against X, Y, and Z, and and my mother and I were thinking militia, and then and then all sorts of other guerrilla exercises, communist participation, fascist participation. I mean, it's really, really thorough, but that's only one of the many things we had to do. Then you do biometric testing, and then fingerprinting, and then
medical exams,
medical exams, and poking and prodding. I mean, I remember just because we had fled Iran, we weren't able to bring with us our vaccination records. So everything that I had gotten in Iran as a kid, I had to do again because we didn't have the records to present. So all of this is to say, and of course FBI background checks, and and all sorts of other other background checks that had to clear us that there were no police records, criminal records, so on and so forth. And I was thinking that now that I've lived here for over 30 years, I know of very few non-immigrant Americans who would ever let themselves be scrutinized in the ways that the immigrant is scrutinized prior to coming to the United States. That it's an invasion of privacy in every possible way on so many different levels. And I think the fact that the non-immigrant Americans aren't aware of these tedious processes is part of the reason why it becomes easy or possible for those who are anti-immigrant to make the claims that they do, that immigrants are unsafe or make our communities unsafe. Because given what it's like, I can't imagine how we could possibly be the ones who create a major threat.
I in thinking about all the advice that you give the new immigrant in this book, I noticed there was one thing kind of missing, and that's sort of some of the recent and sort of ugly attacks on immigrants. And I don't just mean verbal, I mean physical. It's on my mind because I've been writing a lot about Afghan refugees recently. And I just saw a story the other day about some Afghan refugees who are living temporarily at a hotel in Kentucky, waiting to be resettled, who got pepper sprayed. They were sought out and attacked by pepper spray. And I know this is something on your mind too. You as a Jewish refugee have been writing about sort of the recent and shocking rise of attacks on synagogues. Is that advice worth giving people, or is there a reason, not to scare people? Is it rare?
When I, the book was turned in, I mean, I wrote the book before there were attacks on Asians, and the attacks were less physical and they were more verbal when I was done writing the book. I think the physical stuff came a little later, but but I do take on in the book the feelings of discrimination, or the expressions of discrimination and bigotry towards immigrants. And in some ways, and I tried to go back as far as I could to show that part of American history is the history of bigotry towards newcomers. And first of all, I thought,
and not just toward newcomers, but a generation of immigrants sort of turning against the next generation of immigrants, right?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Exactly. I mean, in some ways, one generation comes in and wants to shut the door on other people who may be coming even from the places they have left themselves. So it is an odd thing that I can't quite explain why we should be doing this as, against our own compatriots. But besides, I thought it was very important to remind everybody that there is nothing new about the exercise of bigotry towards immigrant groups, and that, and in some bizarre way, I thought this is reassuring. It's reassuring to remember we have done this in the past and we have gotten over it. And we are doing the same thing as we have done, but perhaps what we can be proud of or reassured by is the fact that we have more in place as far as rights and legal procedures are concerned to protect those immigrant communities that come under attack. Far more than we did, let's say, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was in place, right? So I took this journey looking at the history of bigotry against immigrants to show that, you know, Benjamin Franklin wanted to keep Germans out because he thought they were not smart enough to learn English. And in some ways, he thought Russians were not white enough. And he wanted, you know, more Scandinavians and Nordic people in the country because, you know, others were a shade too dark for his taste. And so I thought it was very important to kind of have this full view, just so we could step back and perhaps see that we're part of history, but also in some ways see how we had overcome these hurdles in the past throughout history in order to learn how we could possibly overcome them now. And I think there are wonderful, wonderful lessons from looking at the history of you know, these acts of discrimination against immigrant communities.
And what are they?
Well, you know, we wanted to keep the French out. You know, at the end of the 18th century, we, you know, because we were at war with them, and so I think it's important to remember that, you know, when there is a war going on, we are going to turn against people of the nationality of the nation, the country that we are at war with. And then, you know, with the Chinese, as soon as we had a disaster like the Pearl Harbor, all of a sudden Chinese immigrants started to volunteer to go to war on behalf of the United States. And then they became good immigrants because they were willing to fight. And so I think it reminds us that, you know, immigrants who we may be suspicious of their sense of patriotism and loyalty can and will step up to the plate when they're called to do so. So I just thought that that, you know, having sort of that perspective would be good for all of us.
Is important. I want to end our conversation on a higher note and
Yes.
go to one of the points that you make in the book that I really liked, which is, you know, talking about the way that Americans are uniquely resilient. And you gave examples, you know, the way that we decide to commemorate Martin Luther King is we celebrate his birthday every year. You know, we don't mark the date of his assassination and make him a martyr. Or even September 11th, where you say, you know, instead of a day of mourning, we have a day of remembrance and service. You know, can you speak to sort of how that struck you as sort of unique?
I was stunned the first time around when I don't remember when it was exactly, when I attended a funeral in the United States for the first time, and you know, there was music, you know, there was a band, and people started, you know, playing music, and also the people who were supposed to eulogize the dead cracked jokes, and everybody was laughing. And I kept looking around thinking, somebody's going to, you know, shoo them off the stage or arrest them, or at least inappropriate, if not against the rules. But then, you know, to my utmost surprise, everybody was laughing. And then, you know, people did the favorite dance of, you know, the person who had passed away wanted, you know, the attendees to do. And I realized that at the end of the day, death doesn't seem to slow Americans down. And there was a very small space in their actual lives and in their in their ceremonies that they leave for grief and for mourning. And then the idea is that we've got to go to work, we because there is a future. And I think this is a very important issue or point that I tried to make in the book, saying that when you live in a democracy, there is a future, because you are an individual, and the individual is given the time and the space to plan a life, because the society wants the individual to actualize himself or herself. And so there's a future. We're all moving towards building something for ourselves, for our families, whatever. And when you live in non-democratic societies, you're always preparing for some kind of disaster, where, whether it's some kind of attack on the nation, or some sacrifice that the nation has to make on behalf of a greater cause, right? Whether it's an ideological, religious, whatever. And so the future is not as clear and not as attainable as it is in the United States. So while we are constantly called upon to move forward, and de-emphasize death by celebrating the birthdays of our past heroes, in a lot of non-democratic countries, including especially for instance Iran, the emphasis is oftentimes on death, and on anniversaries are celebrated or marked, I should say, around the passing of someone. And therefore you realize that in moving from that kind of culture to this, that part of what you ought to do and you ought to transition into is to actually plan for a life and a future, as opposed to just be bogged down by trying to figure out the difficulties of the present or holding the grudges of the past.
Fantastic. I just wanted to read a couple sentences from that passage of the book, where you say, in every anomaly, the American sees an opportunity to create something original. For the American, there is always too much to do, too much to see, too much to anticipate, to wallow in grief or the thought of death. And Roya, when I read that, I thought of you, because you came to this country 30 something years ago as a refugee, and look what you've done with your experience. You've taken that, you've turned it into 3 books, into books of poetry, into advocacy. And so I wanted to thank you for your work and encourage everyone here to engage with Roya's work, to read this book, to go back and read her other books, her essays in the Washington Post. So thank you.
Thank you. It's fun. Thank you.
Let's go to some audience questions, shall we?
Sure.
Okay. I'm scanning these. Roya, what is the biggest culture gap that you remember encountering?
Well, I think we were covering it. I turned in my first college essay to a history teacher who was very fond of me. She was lovely. Her name was Harriet Cram. I had her at Cohen College, and she had a way of knowing, somehow intuitively, what I was going through. So so she was trying very hard to help me catch on with the course, but most importantly to write the sort of paper that she could give a respectable mark to. And I remember when I first turned in a paper, she gave me 2 grades. She said the first grade was an A for content, and C for, for prose writing. And her criticism was that, it's too obscure. It's your language is indirect, and you use too many metaphors. And I know exactly what she was trying to say, because I was writing with my Iranian head. I was trying to, not be direct. I was trying to most importantly, not use my own perspective and try to kind of hide what it was that I was trying to say in a, all sorts of indirect hints at my own intention or my own opinion. And so that was one of the great difficulties. And I think another was that it really physically took, I don't know, a couple of years not to be afraid to walk on the street, with some male companion at my side, whether it was a college classmate or a boyfriend or whomever. But I was always afraid, even though I clearly knew that I was no longer in Iran, that we would be arrested. So, I would turn around and look who's walking behind us. So those were some of the more visceral and real problems of those early years.
This is another reader question, have you noticed generational differences within families of immigrants when it comes to cultural preservation versus assimilation? Oh man, this is a rich one.
Certainly. Well, you can answer that better than I can, right?
Oh, you go first.
Yes, I think so. I think not just by virtue of one generation, having come to America, and then the next generation having been born and raised here, but also I think even the generation that comes from, going back to Iran now is a bolder, less inhibited generation than mine was when I first came. And I think part of it is sort of the presence of this equalizer, which we call the World Wide Web, that so much information, and as a result, culture keeps traveling and crossing boundaries that I think,
that's one thing I always hear is immigrants coming today know so much more about America than probably you did or my parents did.
Absolutely.
Yeah. From TV.
So are you very different than your parents' generation?
I'm curious to hear about your kids too. One thing I think I said to you the other day is that, on the one hand, I've heard about the difficulty of my own parents' experience coming to America and what it was like for them to first settle here. My mom didn't speak very much English, and she's told me about how frightening it was every time she had to go out and speak English, and she almost didn't want to say anything because she was afraid of making mistakes. On the other hand, and I think this is an experience a lot of children of immigrants share, is what I found, is that the immigration story, just like the American story, of what is one of sort of extreme resilience. And you are surprised as you grow up how little you actually know about the difficulty that your parents experienced, because part of the American ethos is to sort of say, well, I made it, I'm alive, so I need to look ahead, not backward. Do you feel like your kids feel that way at all?
That's very true. I mean, well, in my particular case, my kids aren't even interested what the story was. But I don't insist on telling them. I think, I think people have to, including children, need to exercise their own curiosity and come to whatever knowledge if and when they need it. But yes, I think we all, one of the greatest questions that I think every immigrant, knowingly or unknowingly, must answer or resolve is, what am I going to do with my memories? I think we
Yes.
all, whether
Yes.
consciously or unconsciously, make the decision whether we're going to what to do with the past, whether to incorporate it in our current lives or lock it away. And I think, depending on what side of this decision we fall on, we may be incorporating um, the past as sort of an ongoing narrative, or we may entirely lock it away and put it aside. And I think that is part of the process of immigration, thinking and deciding how the past will be uh, or not be
Remember.
in
Yeah.
presence.
Yeah. I think about that all the time too. And I
Mhm.
don't know if I've done enough with my own family to make sure that I have those things recorded.
Right,
So
right.
it's a duty for all of us.
Mhm.
Um, Roya, I love this question. Are
Yeah.
there Iranian or Jewish customs you've practiced in your own family that you enjoy sharing with others who are unfamiliar with them? What can we share with our audience? What should we be eating or doing?
um, well, I think we um, I remember very fondly our Passover seders um,
Mhm.
from Iran, and that they were very noisy and crowded, and as I guess seders are everywhere. But it was also rambunctious because we do dayenu in a way by hitting each other as
We should
uh,
describe it. You actually, yeah, unlike other seders where you sort of sing Diana, we actually get up and we grab what are they, scallions? And we
scallions.
smack each other with them kind of violently.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's fun, and I think you know I have never known a kid who didn't enjoy doing that. So
Yeah.
yeah, those and certainly the food, right?
Yes.
And the holiday of, I mean, the start of the Iranian New Year, which falls on the first day of spring, which makes all the sense in the world to be the start of a new calendar year. When the buds start to bloom and trees start to come alive again, that's when a new year is marked.
Right.
It was the start of such a beautiful occasion for me.
Wouldn't it be so much easier to keep our New Year's resolutions if it wasn't totally dreary out? We start our new year. uh, Roya, what can activists and legislators do to dispel some of the fearful or hateful rhetoric that is painted on immigration?
um, Aside from reading my book,
Good
I think
start.
I really think that we as immigrants do a lot to learn and master the American civil uh, processes, right? We
Mhm,
we try to
mhm,
learn a little bit of history. We try to understand or get gain some kind of a understanding of the political process here, and the way our communities,
mhm,
cities are
mhm,
structured, and um, a lot of details, and we are tested on these things, right? We before naturalization can actually happen, we have to
mhm,
pass an oral exam, and then a written exam, and then
mhm,
we go for a ceremony where we are sworn in, and all of those things. They're not enough. We can always do more, but they are things we do in order to understand what it means to become an American. But I don't think that the majority of non immigrant Americans work as hard as we do to become the Americans that we work toward becoming, nor do I think they know what the immigration process is like for the immigrants who arrive. So I want to actually present this challenge to all non-immigrants to go take a citizenship application and try to fill it out. You know, look at what it's like to undergo this process and do a little bit of what we do. We have to humbly subject ourselves to so many interviews, trials, applications, tests, and finally a serious swearing in ceremony and all that. But you guys who are non-immigrants, you're simply born, and that's the only hurdle that you have to overcome. You're born, you get a birth certificate, and you're in. But I think it would be nice to switch places, to get the non-immigrant to experience some of the processes that we undergo and some of the hurdles that we overcome. And look at the actual documents, look at the actual applications, try to see what the screening process is like. And I think that would help all of us understand each other far better than we do today.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is that, I report on immigration and immigration policy daily. And the thing I think about that I think I have a window into that most people don't is just, and I think about this a lot when I see Americans criticizing America. How can we not roll out testing faster? What kind of country are we? Like all this exasperation. And it's so jarring to see that in contrast to what my inbox looks like every day, or my Twitter DMs, where I get messages, I mean, truly every day, from people in Kenya or people in Uzbekistan who send me their resumes or send me things that just say, I'm so desperate. My dream is to move to America. I just want to come there and work. How can I do that? I think it's worth us remembering, how lucky we are to have what we have, and that there's so many people out there who would die for our imperfect America. Yeah.
Precisely. I get those emails too, and I'm not an immigration reporter. So there.
I'm not seeing many more questions in the queue. I like this one, so I'll ask it to you, but maybe we'll wrap up after this. Do you have favorite depictions in fiction or nonfiction of the immigrant experience in other books, and television or film?
That's a good question. Pretty much all the books that I list in my own resources, the books that I used in order to compile my own kind of aggregate of immigrant experience in my own book, are books that I really loved. And I can't think of film at the moment, but one of my most favorite books was one by the immigration reporter for the New York Times, a good
One Mighty and Irresistible Tide.
No.
No.
A good provider is the one who leaves.
Yes.
And it was the story of a multi-generational family who could not sustain themselves within their own country, and then had to kind of travel around the world. And so he, over the span of 20 years, captures the story of this family. And I thought it was a really impressive exercise to be focused on 2 or 3 singular cases in order to show us what it takes for some people in other parts of the world to simply make a living or provide for their own families in their own countries. I thought that was staggeringly wonderful. A good provider is one who leaves, was the title of the book.
We are hitting about an hour, which I think in my personal opinion is quite enough time to spend on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you both to the moon and back. What an amazing and just continuously timely discussion. For all of our attendees at home, I know what book I'll recommend. You should definitely grab A Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious. The book link is in the chat column. If you'd like to share this discussion afterwards, we'll have a recording available on our YouTube channel later, providing some time for processing and editing. You can also visit us at politics-prose.com. Our thanks to author Roya Hakakian and Michelle Hackman. It's really been a delight to have you both. And from all of us here at Politics in Prose, we hope everyone out there is staying safe, staying strong, and of course, staying well read. We'll see you all next time. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.